to Real Talk with Tina and Ann. I am Ann. And today we have one of the most incredible voices that we have had on the podcast. Rebecca Galli is a best-selling author and a columnist of over 400 columns. She has written two books, Rethinking Possible, a memoir of resilience, and a daily inspirational book, Morning Fuel. Rebecca, I have read every single word of your first book, Rethinking Possible, and I'm following along in your daily inspirational book, Morning Fuel. I've read a lot of books and I have met a lot of people. I can honestly say the more I have read about your story and learned about who you are as a person, I am so honored to meet you and to have you on.
Oh, you're bringing me to tears. Thank you so much. A pleasure to be able to connect with you. I know it took us a while to get this arranged, and I'm honored to be on your show. Thank you.
Well, I want to talk about your story from Rethinking Possible while we talk about Morning Fuel, because the wisdom on the papers in your inspirational book is earned. Every single page. To put a list of what you have gone through does not do it justice. And you have to read your story. And I'm encouraging all of our listeners to pick up both books. At the beginning of Morning Fuel, which, by the way, I start with my Starbucks too, and I love my Starbucks. And your words speak to me. And your dad was right. Writing is a gift that you have picked up from him, probably. I mean, he was a man of words. I would
Absolutely.
love to talk about the words from your dad, your mom, your brother, and you in the podcast. You started your inspirational book with these words. Some would say, life has not been kind to me. I lost my 17-year-old brother, and his name was Forrest. Two of my four children had special needs. One of my two sons died at age 15, and his name was Matthew. And at 38, 9 days after my divorce was finalized, I was paralyzed by transverse myelitis, if I'm saying that right, a
That's right.
rare, a rare inflammation of the spinal cord that affects 1 in a million. And it's been hard to power through and live fully in this life I did not choose. But I've learned that how I start my day sets the tone for how I get through the day. You know, who I thought about when I was reading these. And I'm going to just say this before I ask any questions, because as I read that, I thought about your mom sitting in the kitchen, sitting there with you, drinking coffee and just giving you her wisdom. I thought about your dad and him standing up there at the pulpit and his words of wisdom. And I thought about Forrest and his last words and, you know, what that must have meant. I saw your sister Rachel's arms holding you up in the bathroom, and I just was laughing. And I saw your strength, a strength I've not seen before. I saw your kids. I saw your son Peter reflecting on life. I saw your daughter Brittany's heart. I saw Madison's autism flair for life, which I'm autistic, and three of my kids are autistic. So I absolutely appreciate her story. And I saw Matthew's beautiful eyes looking up at you, with his, beautiful brown eyes. And even though that he was medically fragile, and, I just saw everything in your life right there on the pages in these books. And I also saw our stories, everybody's stories right there on the pages. And that was what was so beautiful about it, because, you are more than a million. I think every family has a piece of your story. Your pain is so deep, but yet you live each day with intention, positivity, and incredible gratitude, which is what you say. But everybody understands what it's like to take care of a child, or to have a hurt, or to have a loss, or a death, or somebody that, your child is really having a hard time, and you're having a hard time being able to get to them or take care of their needs. And I think every single one of us can relate. So thank you so much for writing this.
Oh, goodness. Well, it was therapeutic. It was part of the journey, really. Something I started early on, just the power of lassoing those thoughts and putting them down so they don't just bother you all the time. So it's been a therapeutic journey through writing, and then now connecting with people. It's amazing how that's helped me connect to others.
Yeah, I bet. I mean, yeah, you get to help yourself while helping them, and your story really does help other people. Your dad once said, your dad's words, I'll tell you what, what is planned is possible. And I love your title because rethinking possible, it's so perfect because the only thing that seemed to go your way was that you had 4 kids. The rest of your life took twists and turns that you had no control over. And you were living a life that just was. You had to be and figure it out as life just happened. But throughout both books, your family's words, your words, I think were lifelines. Your brother had beautiful words that he said before he passed away at age 17. Could you share what those words were and how that helped carry you in your life?
Yeah, so my brother was 17. I mean, he was that kid. He was president of the student body. He was a musician. He was a church leader. He was an athlete. He had great plans to go to Wake Forest University, get into politics, become a senator, lawyer, all this. And he was definitely doing that thing. What's planned is possible. And we grew up with that mantra. And one of the last things that he did before he went water skiing, which is where he had his
Mm,
accident,
mm,
was to write his essay to Wake Forest University. And one of the last questions they asked was, tell us about your family. And he did. And he
mm,
expressed his contentment with the family. But his last words of that essay, and they wound up being his last written words,
mm,
were, I would change nothing.
mm.
And it still gets up. If he only lived 17 years, but
Yeah,
he could still write that, and as a sister, see him live that.
yeah,
What an accomplishment, even in 17 years.
right.
It's always been a challenge to me, before I lay my head on my pillow, is there anything I regret today? I would change nothing. Can I say that about the day? So it's really been something really precious that he left us with.
Yeah, a lot of people don't get something like that. And to know that that's how he felt, that's just so beautiful. I mean, it was like it was meant to be.
Yes, I hate to, and there's a part of the book, the Rethinking Possible, where I get really angry about those words
Yeah,
because they weren't the words I would have chosen. I would have changed so many things of the day that we lost him. He wasn't looking where he was going, or he was
yeah,
distracted, or
yeah,
all of the things I would have changed. So it's an interesting study in the emotions that happen around loss, where there's this mixed things. I'm glad he was content, but I'm so, it was just so much to absorb that I'd lost him like that. So
yeah,
it's been still even a tough loss now. I read
sure.
that section when I do some book talks, and I'll give myself a high five if I get through that without crying. But yeah, some profound words for a 17-year-old.
And I think that's normal for us when there's a loss lots of times and it's something like that, where it's like, well, if I just would have been there at this time, if I just would have said something before they went that way or whatever, I mean, survivor's guilt is a real thing. So
Yes.
I like waking up and looking at words like yours in the morning because I think that it's really important. It helps us get outside of our head. It helps us, start our day correctly for myself. I mean, how important is it for you or for other people why you wrote in this inspiring book for them to wake up and want to go to it and pick it up and say, you know what, this is where I want to start my day every morning. And even if they just need a pick me up during the day.
Yeah, it was a practice of mine after I wrote the first book. a lot of the questions I would get would be, how do you do it? How do we keep going? And one
Mm.
of the things I do every morning is pick from several daily readers and have that with
Oh.
my coffee, and I journal a little bit. I read some more. I do some reflection, and I really try to start it on the most positive way possible. So when it came time for my second book, I said, why don't I write what I read every day?
Mm-hmm.
So I
Mm-hmm.
found it to be helpful to myself, just to start off with a positive note, and then sometimes I don't get to it first time, first thing in the morning, but it's a good power boost. Just
Mm-hmm.
sometimes I think we get so caught up in it could be just busyness, or even
Sure.
the day starts sliding downhill a little bit, and this provides kind of a distraction, separation from whatever's going on, so that you can kind of pull yourself back, regroup, and maybe get a different thought in your mind.
Yeah, and they're short, So I mean, it's super nice to be able to just pick it up and be able to go take your thoughts in a different direction. I mean, it really does help.
Thank you.
Now, can you talk a little bit because your life, I mean, it went on a pretty rough course, and it's not the life that you really do plan. So, can you talk a little bit about that real life, the kind that takes us down Niagara Falls when we are not looking, and we have no boat and it just takes us down and we're trying to find our way to the surface and take a breath?
Well, I like to say that when I'm at my best, I have really big shock absorbers, that
Mm,
whatever bump is coming
mm,
along, that I've enlarged my group of friends, enlarged my plans, so that I'm not trapped to one single way of getting through something. I think this rethinking possible cycle that
mm,
I talk about sometimes is that you have to accept the situation, whatever it is, up front. You have to realize that I'm in a place I didn't plan. And
mhm.
then I think the next step is to be very honest about what's your capability to deal with the situation. Can you manage it by yourself? And if you can't bring in people, like to call it who's in your boat, who can help you
Oh.
get through this storm that you're
Mhm.
ill-equipped to manage. And it may be family, it may be friends, it may be professional therapist, it may be clergy, but people that can support you in the particular situation you're in. And it's actually through the years been surprising that crew changes. Even
Mhm.
when we lost our parents, Rachel and I were trying to comfort each other, and we realized after the death of our father that we couldn't really comfort each other because we were in our own grief, and so we needed to
Mhm.
expand our pool of people in our boat, because we just made each other sadder instead of trying
Sure.
to help each other cope. And I think that that's not a first thought, that you think your family should be they're the ones who know you best. They should be able to support you, but
Mm.
they're in the same grief. Uh, Chances are they may not be the best person to get you through it. So
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
that idea of determining who can be helpful to you as you navigate through is a real core uh, mode for me of operating. I'm
Mhm.
constantly looking for who can be helpful in a situation like this. And to be honest, it's not always easy to ask for help. A
It
lot of us
isn't.
just like to do it on our own, but that's where you need to be really honest about your capacity to cope with it by yourself.
Right. And it's, finding the right people to allow in. And that can be hard. I mean, I'm in a situation right now where, somebody in my family desperately needs help. And so, it's really praying, trying to figure out who the right people are, and being okay with letting outside people in, because that's
Yeah.
not always easy. And I know that probably, lots of times in your life when you uh, were first paralyzed, or when you were, and I heard that somehow some of the people talked about you when I read that in the book. I don't think that that's okay. And the people that you're trusting, you want them to have the same heart as you. You want them to be on the same page as you with your family and what you're trying to do in your grief, and it's just not okay. So it's hard.
Yes. I say you can always uninvite them. You just don't, you kind of keep them out
Mm,
of the loop of information,
I
and
love it.
you know,
Uninvite them. Well, I love that. And I do that sometimes. Um, you know what, we like I said earlier, with your dad and you having this beautiful way of being able to use words, and his words were just always wonderful. One of the things that he said after your brother passed away was, you will always walk with a limp, but you will walk. And I mean, for one thing, there is no one way to move forward. And I instantly thought of how those words changed for you when you were no longer able to walk. But I realized nothing in your life is traditional. Definitions of moving forward are just what they are. They're always changing, but you continue to move forward. So, how did your dad's words or your mom's words help you to move forward during some of your darkest times?
they wound up being these little pearls, that they had taken something terribly uh, disruptive, just unimaginable. And they somehow, with their way of looking at things, made it palatable, made
Mm,
it so that I could latch on to what they were saying and walk with a limp. I thought about that. I can't walk at all, but the meaning of that is that it's okay to be wounded. It's okay to
okay.
have your pain. It's
Oh,
okay to have a scar and have it impact you, that you're not flawed. You're just
mm-hmm.
moving through with what life gave you.
Hmm.
So I think that, and that's the way what did he say? Dad, I think, was timely, but also timeless in the way that he
Yeah.
expressed himself. So
Yes.
I could look at it differently.
I love that. What do you do? You said in morning fuel, and this was a great question. What do you do when you don't know what's next? You lived in that space, I think, for years. And I think many of us do, not as extreme of yours, of course, because you literally could barely get your breath and another tragedy would strike you or your family. And how do you live when you don't know what's next without constantly waiting for the next heartache to happen?
Yeah, that's a great question. There are a couple of things. When my son Matthew presented with seizures,
Yeah.
it was really hard to know whether or not he would outgrow them or not. I've
Mm,
been told that there was a good chance that he could outgrow them,
mm,
but the way they told us, that we just have to see if the seizures continued or not.
mhm.
So a therapist in the hospital said, when you don't know what's next, when there's uncertainty ahead, she said, have you tried parallel paths? Like, what do
Oh,
you?
yes.
And she said, well, you look at the situation and you look at the two obvious outcomes. There may be more than that, but the two that you want, or the one that you want for sure, the hope path, which is you hope he outgrows them. And then envision life like that. What would life look like if
Mhm,
he did outgrow them and he resumed normal progression? And then on the reality path, or the path you don't want, um, what would life look like if he doesn't? And
mhm,
that just really calmed me down of this cycle and gave me paths I could journey on really at the same time. What would life look like if he was able to come home and he resumed normal development? And should I explore options if he can't come home? And what would that look like? And so either way, it kept me moving. It wasn't cyclical, it was moving in directions.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then over time, it became obvious what was that he wasn't going to be able, his seizures continued and that he was going to be, in a declining situation.
Mm-hmm.
But I use that image of parallel paths with my divorce. Would we reconcile? Would we not? With my paralysis, would I walk? Would I not? And in that way, these two paths, it kept me moving forward. And so when the one option became obvious, then I'd already done work on that. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, I wasn't prepared at all.
Mm-hmm.
But I really think that was a helpful way for me to keep moving, because I think keeping moving is very important. We risk isolation when we just spin. Um, and another thing I like to do, I would I call them, put them on a shelf. When things are troubling, I call these shelves in my mind. It's like, I'm not going to deny that this is an issue, but I'm not going to look through it every day. I'm going to put it on a shelf in my mind, and then worry about that another time. But then do what's next in my life to live fully in the life I do have when I don't know what's ahead, and then spend time in that.
Yeah, I read in your book, I think something about your dad said put pegs in your brain or something and put it on the put it on
You
the
know,
peg for later. And it was such a great visual. And it really did help because I was like, oh, yeah, I'm going to start doing that. I'm just going to put pegs in my brain and put those, be pretty compartmentalized. One of the things in your story was you had multiple miscarriages, and you also, there was so much going on in your family at the time. And I remember you describing how you'd see other families, and I think it was at the doctor's or something, and you saw that they were happy. And even though you spoke about your family to others at times. And it was, yeah, it's perfect. I remember that word perfect because you were also carrying so much pain at the time. And you were juggling Matthew's hospital care, Madison's early autism needs, Peter's challenges at the beginning, and Brittany's energy, all at once. And it was so much. How do you hold gratitude and grief at the same time? Do you try to separate the good from the bad, or do they live together?
I think they live together. It's all about focus. And I think it's important to acknowledge that pain when you see kind of the perfect family, or, um, you know, the perfect situation that you wish you could do, and somebody enjoying something that you once did and you can no
Mm-hmm.
longer do, or
Mm-hmm.
seeing other children develop fully, and two of yours are not. So I think that, again, I have to be honest about that hurts. There's a little bit of that hurts. It's like, because there's, I don't, envy, there's jealousy, all of those feelings, but to touch them and go, like, yep, feel that. But you know what? Try to experience their joy with them, to experience something that you may not have, but just because you don't have it doesn't mean it doesn't have value to experience.
Mm-hmm.
So um, that's when I'm at my best self. When I'm not at my best self, maybe I take some time away from that and I don't expose myself to that too much. If I'm too raw, if I'm not strong enough to embrace that joy. But it's a tough situation.
I live a little bit similar to that in that, I've I've adopted 5 kids, and the three littles all have autism. I adopted them when they had a lot of trauma, and one is, really has a difficult time in general, and she's really having a rough time. And the other two, one I homeschool, one is on the lower end of the functioning, and even though he just turned 12, today's his birthday, he operates at probably like a 5-year-old level. And I just love him to death. He is just the sweetest kid, and I just love, he's got the best heart. But, he wants so badly to play football with his peers and to go out and do those things. And I look on Facebook and it's kind of like this thing where I don't even want to look, you know, because those I wish statements, feelings, thoughts come into my head. And I just want to say, yeah, I know how much he wants that. I wish he could have that. So, we have him in special needs baseball and all that other stuff. And I mean, he just absolutely loves it. But, I'm going to be honest, those times they do hurt when you see other families and what they're able to do, and you know that you're just not able to, and your kids can't experience those typical things. So,
Yes, it's hard.
and I mean, can you talk about how it feels to celebrate others when you privately carry loss?
Um, when I can get the right mindset to do that, and I think you're right about social media. I think we all see the bright and shiny things. And so sometimes I limit myself to that. But if I have
Mm-hmm.
personal friends and that are really have a lot to celebrate, I try to just minimize, my grief and my pain to try to
Mm-hmm.
celebrate with them, because there's again, it's a distraction from what you've got going on to say, let me lean in fully to what they're experiencing and see if and be more
Yeah.
inquisitive about what's going on with them and just embrace it. And yeah, I think it's worth that if you're secure enough to do that. If you're fragile, and I think that's a big point to
Mm-hmm.
assess yourself. Like, are you strong enough to do that today? Maybe you
Mm-hmm.
haven't slept well. Maybe you aren't feeling well. I think all of those things uh, affect how we our strength to handle things that might be difficult. So, self-assess first, and then if you can lean into it, do it. And I think you'll be glad you did. I think it's a something you can appreciate about stretching yourself.
Yeah, I really like to be other people's cheerleaders, and that's what I try to do. And I think that that helps be able to step outside and, just be other people's cheerleaders. And sometimes, like you said, I have to kind of analyze and, assess where I am at the moment and say, okay, I can do that. No, today I can't. And it's okay. It's both are okay.
Right. Absolutely. Yep.
So you wrote so openly about feeling isolated during some hard times. Like many women, we carry the appointments, the hospital stays, the sleepless nights, often when your husband was busy doing him. And, you know, how do you handle the loneliness that comes from actively holding up a family that needed so much and you did it alone?
Well, I say, you alone can do it, but you can't do it alone. And I had a lot of
Okay.
people in the boat with me. My family
Mm-hmm.
was a big support. My church was a big support. I
Mm,
had neighbors that would reach out, and uh, I think it's
yeah.
important to cultivate a community around yourself so that you don't feel alone.
That's so important. My husband actually lives in a separate place because it's too hard for him. And I, in one sense, understand, but in the other, sometimes I beg him to just come and take the kids and go do something with them, get involved a little bit. But, when you felt, was it you, were you unlovable? I kind of felt that a little bit. And I went to that. Oh my gosh, I had no idea that 80% of marriages with special needs kids fail. I didn't know. That's huge. But I really do think that some of us can handle the hard and just some of us can't. I mean, that just seems what it comes down to sometimes.
Yeah, it's hard to know your capacity for things until you're in it, and it's hard to uh, know another person's capacity for things as well. Yeah, I don't think you can predict those things until
No,
you're in
you can't. No, no. And you and your husband did, you grew apart and divorce became the answer. And suddenly you were a single mom of four. And I wanted to just reach through the pages and give you a hug because, your dad always says, trust the process. And I cannot tell you how many times I say that. You always chose the hard road, even when the easier road was right in front of you at times. And sometimes, us, especially as moms, we don't see the other option. We don't see the choice. What do you think helped you trust those hard instincts and go the hard road, even when you didn't know the outcome?
I think a lot of times it's we want to put up barriers and walls, and I can do it myself, or I don't need this person in my life, or we tend to be final about some if things if particularly if we've been hurt or felt betrayed. But
Mm-hmm.
I think that what helped me was really leaning into love. One of the things I had told Brittany
Mm.
and her husband to be
Yes.
to
Mm-hmm.
in their marriage, to let their love be larger.
Yes.
Let love be larger than their circumstance, than any of the things that threaten their relationship. And I've tried to live that. It's not always easy, but I feel like that power of love can really help you accept the things you can't change and create relationships with people that maybe don't make sense exactly, but it makes sense for you because it's a greater good that for you to embrace others. So I that and it's you know not the first person to say the power of love, but letting your love be larger is really when again at my best self. That's what I lean into.
That was one of my favorite. There were so many different, favorite parts of the book, but that was one of my favorite parts of the book is when you didn't know what you would say to them at the wedding, but then you wrote this thing down on let your love be larger than adversity, larger than. And I was just like, oh my gosh, that is just so beautiful. And it made me wonder if you had so many things happen to you that tried to take you down. But I just wondered if maybe it was that love was larger than this and love was larger than and it just maybe love is what got you through.
I think so. I got to experience that in my home. Yeah, we struggled after Forrest's death. We Our family shattered. Not necessarily emotionally, but we lived in different places. I was in college. My sister was in Forest High School. My father had taken a new pastorate in another state, and so we physically weren't together. And then we grieved differently. Uh,
Right.
Father could be very public with his expressions of grief, and very quickly became a noted lecturer on grief, as well as
Mm,
speaking from the pulpit, writing about it. My mom,
mm-hmm.
much more private, and was in
Mm,
support groups for
yeah.
women that have lost children, and I was with my college buddies who helped me move through grief in their own
Mm,
way, structure
mm-hmm.
and activity. But my sister wanted to be with him. They were, 17 months apart, and so they had to get her specialized counseling for her.
Mm,
So I think that we continued to love each other, even though we were in different places in grief and different physical places. We figured out ways to be family through small things. My dad would send me his sermon tapes. My mom would be sending me little notes at school that would have
mm.
sticks of chewing gum in them and some stamps
Oh.
to encourage me to write her. And so you just kind of be creative during those periods of awkwardness to try to
Mm-hmm.
connect with people
Mm-hmm.
that matter to you.
Your father's final days, which things can be hard and beautiful at the same time. And he shared something with you that was deeply profound. And could you share what he said and how those words impacted you?
Yeah. So they had told us that Dad was probably not going to get better. He
Mm-hmm.
was in the hospital, um, and he kidney cancer had come back, and he was lucid, but he
Mm-hmm.
brought mom and dad. I mean, he brought Rachel and myself and my mom together, and we had a little prayer together. And then he said, "I want you guys to remember to take care of yourselves."
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't take care of each other, which I like. I look at Rachel and say, "Did she say take care of ourselves?" And
Mm-hmm.
um, And yes, it was like, wait a minute. I felt sure he was going to say take care of each other, but it drove home the point that until we take care of ourselves, we really can't take of other care of other people.
Mm-hmm.
Like the airlines tell you to put the oxygen mask on yourself
Yes, I thought
first.
of that. Yes.
Yes. Before you help your children. And of course you want to help your children first, but it doesn't do them any good if you passed out for lack of oxygen. So
Mm-hmm.
I think that really emphasized to me self-care and self-compassion, and figuring out, what's in my best interest to do. For me, it sounds selfish, but the truth is you can't be really functional if your health isn't good. And
Mm-hmm.
my sister and I have
Mm-hmm.
this thing where we say, what's the most important thing for you right now, and the most important thing for you in general. And for me, it's my health. I can't do anything if I can't get my wheelchair and go anywhere, or I can't get out of bed, or my health is very important to me, and so that helps me prioritize things about
Mm-hmm.
what I need to do today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really amazing that, it's always perspective shifts and it's always learning as we go. And you've had many different seasons for you to do that. Life is full of decisions. And I think most of us, especially as parents, second guess ourselves more than we'd ever admit. I'm doing that all the time. When your son Matthew needed medically fragile foster care, you had to make an incredibly hard but necessary choice to place him where he could receive the care that he needed and deserved. You shared that your parents told you they would have done the same if Forrest had survived and needed that level of care. I thought that that was so amazing that they said that to you. How did having their support, especially in that kind of moment and through your life, help you trust that you were making the right decisions as a mother?
It was affirming and, in a strange way, encouraging that it was okay to uh, operate not only in Matthew's best interest, but in our
Right.
family's interest, because that's what mom had said. I said specifically, what would you have done with Forrest? And she said, I would have made the right decision that was in Forrest's best interest and the family. And to include the family in the best interest thinking process really expanded that, because I couldn't care for Matthew by myself. And what would that mean if I tried to do that? Does that mean
Mm-hmm.
school? Does that mean learning techniques and this, and how would that affect the other children that I have too? So
Mm-hmm.
it really encouraged me to consider the family unit as we made decisions. So I found it a great relief for them to be that honest with me about what they would have done.
Yeah, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, you guys all worked together as a team. It felt you guys all supported each other throughout uh, everything that you were going through in life. And I just thought that that was a beautiful thing. Your parents just seemed like they were beautiful people.
They were amazing, and in many ways, I credit the way they handled Forrest. The loss of Forrest has given me kind of a front row seat to how do you get through one
Okay.
of the toughest losses you could ever
Mm,
expect. So
yeah.
there were things I learned from them I didn't even realize I learned from them until I had to cope with it myself.
Sure, sure. I mean, that's what happens. Your dad had other powerful words. He said, happiness lies in the difference between being struck by a challenge and being stuck and a challenge. And that really hit me because that, again, is another perspective shift. I think we all have moments where we need to kind of pause and catch our breath and just be still for a while. But that, I don't call that stuck. Did you ever feel stuck during times when there was progress, or maybe you felt like you weren't really moving, but because you couldn't see it or feel it, but you were doing everything that you could?
Yeah, I came up with this idea of the power of better, or just better moments. And so it's like
Okay.
what was different about today than yesterday? One small thing that got better. It may not have been the best, it may not have been achieve my goal, but did something get better? Did I get
Okay.
the dog out on time, or get get the dog out, early enough for him, or did I wake up without the alarm clock, or did I make a tiny bit of progress and I let that count? I let that count that I was able to do something a little tiny bit better than the day before, and just uh, seeing that progress. I had a gratitude journal that I was doing 3 things I was grateful for every day. And I said, well, you know what? I'm going to track 3 things that were
Mm,
better today about than yesterday. So that encouraged that forward momentum.
mm. You know what? Making it that small sometimes is what we have to do. Sometimes we can only pay attention to the step in front of us or the step that we just took, to where it sometimes it is just, really honing in on a smaller amount of time. I really like that. Madison's journey with autism, of course, autism is very special to my heart, of course, but her story really touched me as an autistic adult as well. And I love how you celebrated her voice after she started ABA. And I loved her place in the family. I loved how Brittany wanted to include her in the wedding and the way that that happened, and then the photos that were taken. And it made me think of your mom as well because photos were so important to her. What were the parts of your kids that helped hold you up? Because they seem to all hold each other up, and you held them up, but what were the parts that helped hold you up?
They kept growing. It was like I was waiting to know, after, especially after paralysis, I was waiting to figure out what I going to walk again. But they had their needs. They were 3, 5, 7, and 9 when I was paralyzed. And
Mm-hmm.
so Madison needed, well, at the time, that was 1997. And so there wasn't a whole lot about autism. And this is
Mm.
when I had reached out to a fellow parent, sent home this yellow flyer in Madison's backpack, and that taught us about ABA, or invited us to her home to learn about ABA therapy. We used that with Madison, and then later that transaction of sharing information that wasn't available through a doctor or educator, that became the basis of Pathfinders for Autism, and that
Yes.
put me on that track, to work with that, toward that for 3 years before it was incorporated. So her needs helped me journey through my waiting of if I was going to walk again. So it was nice to redirect my energy instead of all about me to how can I help Madison.
That was so important. I love that part of the story, and that the Baltimore Orioles wives ended up, raising $100,000, which was the most that they had raised at that time. And then even Michael Phelps, here he is, he jumps on board as an honorary member, and then a radio spot for you. I thought that that was so great. Can you talk more about that?
Sure. So we in the early days, we were just a small group of parents sharing information. We were trying to share our discoveries. And then in 2000, we were
Mm.
incorporated. We hired our first employee who had a child with autism, because at the time, everybody was saying, wait and see what happens. And
Mm-hmm.
we had wanted people to get as many resources as they could and talk to another parent on the phone. This was way before Google or the internet or social media.
Right. Absolutely.
So we started out that way with just a person answering the phone, and we developed a database, then we created special events to try to help raise money. And now, we serve 20,000 people a year with
Oh my
family.
gosh.
Yes, some family events where people can go and feel safe going to the aquarium with their kids with autism, or
Mm,
long gardens, or there's different activities we have. And we also train first responders, whether that
okay.
EMTs, your next encounter is going to be with a person with autism. How would you respond? How can you be sensitized to their needs?
Right.
So been great in 25 years. This year is our 25th anniversary.
Oh
So
my gosh. Can I
yeah,
ask how Madison is doing?
she's doing well. She's 33. She
Mm,
still can't read or write or ever be left alone, but she's doing very well in a residential uh, group home. And then she has a day program as well where she's out in the community every single day.
oh,
So I'm
that's
very,
just great.
very grateful for those support services that Pathfinders actually helped me find. So they're still finding paths for no matter what age, because it seems like they always have needs that are at least outside my capacity to handle. So it's good to have kind
Sure.
of a safety net there to help you.
That's interesting that you called it Pathfinders because you had this thing about paths, you
Yeah.
know, two different paths. And then you created you just took coffee containers and you drew these circles interlocking, and then you created this logo, and then you came up with this. I mean, you were just so thinking outside of the box and trying to do something instead of just sit in the pain. And I just thought that that was amazing that you did that. And look, I mean, you're still now 25 years later. That's so great.
Yeah, and the path keeps going, and I think that the idea of a path is that sometimes it's just finding the path. They're already out there. We just don't know about them, so it's bringing it to light.
Hmm.
Pathfinders. Sometimes we create our own paths out there, but most often they're resources. It's just getting it in a place that people can discover it. Rewarding experience and we have an amazing staff now that are so
Oh,
helpful and so have so much expertise.
is it just within the Baltimore area, or is it, nationwide, or what is it pretty local?
It is a statewide organization,
Oh,
but
okay.
our database serves people from all over the world.
Oh my
uh,
gosh.
Yes. So you can
Oh,
go to pathfindersforautism.org and go on there and search. You can search by age, what age your child is, and what services are recommended. And we have resources on there, which are primarily in the Maryland area, but there's some, we screen the resources we add to our database, and we're open to others contributing too.
I might have to look it up when I get off of here.
Yeah, that's
So,
great.
with your paths and rethinking possible, when you talked earlier about two different paths, you also did that with your own life when you were in the wheelchair. And one, if you would never walk again, and one, if you could. And I thought that that was brilliant. Was that your way of also creating these two paths? And I think you already might have answered this question, but was it your way of forward thinking during a time of acceptance?
Yes, absolutely. That is how I kept myself moving, because it was too hard to just wonder all the time. And I think that uh, you know, as Winston Churchill says, when you're going
Mm,
through, keep going. And to keep going, I needed to feel like that I could make progress.
mhm,
So I did the parallel paths. What happens if I could walk? What happens if I couldn't? And then I had a moment that I decided to give up on
mhm.
walking. This was 19 months in, and I think we had talked about kind of my big toe moment,
Yeah.
where where I decided that was the last thing I could wiggle before the paralysis was complete, was my left big toe. And after 19 months of therapy 3 times a week. I really wasn't making any progress, and I decided to just let go of that. And so I stopped my therapy, and
Mm.
I was able to lean in more fully to a life as a paraplegic mom. And I realized looking back that therapy 3 times a week had taken me away from my kids at the dinner hour for 3 nights a week. So I
Oh,
thought, well, I have that time now. And so I was like, we're going to do what I could remember from my mom's days. And we had candles with our dinner, and I played music. This was back with the CD clubs where, so I bought a bunch of CDs that were funky disco that I loved in my college days, and then jazz, and then classical. And I felt like I was creating another environment for us to be family together. So, but I think we all in life sometimes have these big toe moments when it's like it's time to let go of something that's not going to be a reality for your life.
yeah. I think it's that leaning into acceptance instead of resistance. I mean, that's a hard place to be. It's crossing that line over into fully acceptance, I think.
It is hard.
Acceptance also had a different take for me in your book. Matthew had, and all he had gone through, and your miscarriages, and after your daughter Madison's challenges and Peter's and trying to manage as a single parent in a wheelchair, you know, your entire story of now you have your brother had passed, your dad had passed, you got the call about your mom, and you say you went right to acceptance. You had spent a lifetime of hearing this horrible news, and then going through maybe the grief process or whatever, the steps that you need to go to. But then you went straight to acceptance. And it made me realize that I too have been through so many things in my life that I think sometimes we just go straight to acceptance. And it's like that we become robots to pain. And it's just, okay, I know the drill, and you just go through the motions. Okay, now we got to do this. We got to, the funeral, whatever. And you just are just so numb to it. And it's more something like that. I don't know. Is that how you felt?
Yeah, I think that sometimes when you have this unexpected event that's horrific, and then you move to this why did this
Mm,
happen? I don't
mm-hmm,
deserve this. This isn't fair. All this emotional fog. Uh,
mm-hmm,
But after a while, you realize that that doesn't really do you any good.
right.
It's an emotional thing. You need to process it, but at the moment, you need to like get in action for what is the next step. What are things that need to do, and I call it this pivot from why, and why did all this happen, and all the angst and outrage and that you feel with that why to how are you going to
Mm-hmm,
do it, and how puts you into acceptance mode. And it just that change of question from why to how gets you more in acceptance, and I think helps you move through it more maybe efficiently. That doesn't mean that you can't come back to why at some point, but we
mm-hmm,
knew our mother had had a serious illness. We didn't know why. We did, there's a lot more mystery that there was to investigate. But Rachel got there, and I knew what I needed to do to address the situation.
mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it going from why to how gives you that sense of control. It's like all of a sudden you can do something with the why.
Yeah, you park that why and come back to it, but your how it puts you in problem solving mode
It
instead
does. It
of
does.
wandering, or pondering. You're just gonna, all right, let's do it. What do you need to
Yeah.
do? Examine your resources. Who can help you?
Yeah,
How
that's what you do. That's what we do. It is. One of the things that I absolutely loved about your family was that you found ways to celebrate and have fun. And your family's sense of humor carried all of you, I believe, when your dad did whatever he did in the van, when and you got this van, you're going to go drive it for the first time, and you're in there, your mom's, I guess, in the passenger seat. That's how I pictured it. And your dad does something, and you just tip back and you're staring at the ceiling, and you look over at your mom whose back's to you, and her shoulders are shaking. And I thought she was going to be crying, and she turns around and she's like hysterically laughing. I was like, that is awesome.
She did say, "Are you okay, Bibi?" first before she started laughing. But she was, it was the perfect combination. Dad could tell a joke. I mean, he was a jokester. He just was. And Mother couldn't tell a joke to save her life. She'd tell you the punchline before she would tell you, the
Oh.
story. But she had this, we call it tickle box meltdown, where she would just cry and with tears. She would just be laughing so she couldn't talk. And it really was funny because I was on my back, and at the time I was wearing these patent leather Doc Marten shoes, and I was looking up at the ceiling, and there were my legs. Of course, I can't move my legs, but they're hanging above me. Thank heavens I had my seatbelt on. So it was Dad was trying to use the hand controls of my car, which are meant, you have to be trained to use these things. Well, he just does, he skips ahead sometimes when he's looking at directions. So he just hit that thing, and the van lurched forward, and I went backward, and she was a puddle of tears. But we really had a lot of humor in our
Mm,
household. We did. And when you were talking about being stuck or struck, I had written a morning fuel entry about that because I used it when that phrase when Rachel had come to visit me during I think it was late March one year. Anyway, we had a surprise snowstorm,
mm,
and she couldn't leave. She couldn't fly back home, and we were stuck. And instead of being stuck, we decided to go out and play in the snow. So I did,
hmm.
donuts with my wheelchair, and did snow angels.
That is so fun.
We were struck by the challenge instead of being stuck in it. So it
Yes.
really just gave us a lighter way to look at life, because sometimes it's just so
It,
crazy. It's funny.
yeah,
How can all this stuff happen? Why not laugh about it? We're
sure.
overcome, by grief and by anger. We can be overcome by laughter too. That counts.
Sure. Right, right. And I read that passage in Morning Fuel, and it was really funny. I pictured you doing that. Yeah, it was great. And you're right. You just have to make the best of it. You just have to. I mean, life is happening. You might as well laugh along the way. And
Right?
you had a dance party after your divorce. I mean, that was
Yeah.
awesome. And also, the picture in my mind of you trying to get ready in the bathroom with your friend and your sister for that wedding. And you know what? It was hilarious.
Yeah. We never did that again, but let's just say I wound up on the floor and had a friend pulling me up and Rachel shoving me to the side. But yeah, it was an interesting time in the bathroom.
Well, it made a memory, right?
Yes.